Thanks for joining us for a look back at an amazing career of community service. I'm Dave Kaiser from CCX Media. Thanks for joining us. Proud to be joined by Mike Johnson, who I have had the honor of working with for about 40 years here at CCX Media and other parts of this organization throughout the years. Mike started, believe it or not, in this area in 1982. First title CAC Liaison for Store Cablevision, if people remember back to that. He became the executive director in 2012, and in 2022 he will be retiring. And we're sorry to see him go, but wish him the best. And we thought it would be great to sit down and chat for a few minutes about that 40-year career. Mike, congratulations, welcome.
Thank you, Dave. I don't think I've ever been interviewed by you, and you're like the king of interviews at our station. So
well,
it's a great opportunity.
Save
to
the best for last here for the interview.
But,
so we've got about an hour worth of time we're going to try to shoot for to talk a little bit about what's happened over the years here in your great tie to the community. Let's go back to the 1980s when things got started. What was happening in the television industry and specifically here in the northwest suburbs when you came to this area?
Yeah, they were actually right in the very early 1980s. They were doing a franchising process to build a cable system here in the northwest suburbs. And so in the even prior to that, there were like 4 cities that initially talked and got together and said, "Hey, there's this new thing, cable television, that we need. That you can get all these hundreds of channels
Sure.
and all of these things." So the northwest suburbs, ultimately it came up with 9 cities. So basically it's a joint powers agency of 9 communities that got together and said, we're going to go out and get some requests for proposals to have a cable system built in these 9 northwest suburbs. And so, you know, one thing led to another, because I came from a system in Fridley. That's
right.
where I got my start. And there were 3 cable systems in the early days that were probably built in, say, the mid-70s by General Television. One was in Bloomington, St. Louis Park, and then Fridley. Mm-hmm. And I was at the Fridley location, and that was owned by Store Cable, and Store Cable was the company that built the system out here originally.
Sure. Mm-hmm. When did you start thinking about television as a career? Tell us how that happened for you personally.
That's a great question, Dave, because it really started in high school. I remember taking a class, a communications and speech class, at Irondale High School over in New Brighton. Mm-hmm. And we toured WCCO TV one day, and we watched behind the scenes of the news, and I'll never forget going, wow, this is awesome. Dave Moore at the time was a famous anchor back in those days, was the anchor person at that time, and I saw all the excitement of behind the scenes. And at that moment, that's when I got initially interested in it. But many other things led me down the path when I ended up going to college, and then working at the Star Tribune. We did some video there when I was at the Star Tribune working. It was like a part-time public relations job as a tour guide and also as a kind of an AV guy. So I got to do like focus group meetings and doing so little video meetings there. Mm-hmm. We had a Porta-Pack at the time, which is basically a camera and a camcorder and all that. And so while I was in college, one of the professors said, hey, somebody over at the Fridley station needs a volunteer cameraman. And I got hooked right then, and the rest is history. I was an intern. I started as an intern, as many people did around here, mm-hmm. and it's been a long road since.
When you came to Northwest Community Television, this area, what was your position? What was it like when you started your job?
Well, it's like a deer in the headlights to begin with, because there was a lot that needed to be accomplished. Sure. Again, I was a cable company employee at the time, and so my goal was to get all these studios operational. There were like 5 studios. Cable company made a lot of commitments back in the early days. Mm-hmm. Hundreds of channels, all these commitments, and the 5 studios. And so my job was to get those up and operating, and then get studio managers hired. And then ultimately, shortly after that, we started an LO channel, local origination, where it's more professionally produced. Mm-hmm. So within a very short period of time, we had 5 studios built, one in Plymouth, Maple Grove, New Hope, Brooklyn Center, and then here in Brooklyn Park, across the street at the cable company building.
So thanks again for joining us, Dave Kaiser, Mike Johnson. Mike retiring after 40 years of community service to this area. We're taking a look back at some of the early days. In a little bit, we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that occurred over the years. But let's go back to the beginning. You mentioned the commission earlier. What was it like when the commission was formed, and was it all copacetic all of the time? Were there thoughts about how is this formed and how do we provide this service to the area? Tell us about the commission end of this.
Well, I think on the cable commission side, everything was actually, I mean, it went pretty smooth. As I think the biggest problem in the early days was the construction of the system.
Right.
I think you were involved in a little bit of putting out fires in that level there, of a lot of complaints of people saying, hey, you tore up my my public right of way or whatever, and it hasn't been restored. But I think all in all, and there were some times where things were getting delayed in getting the system built because again, they had miles and miles of cable plant to be built.
Right.
But everybody got along, and there was a strong chairperson, Jack Irving at the time. I mean, he's a guy really, if he said something, it was gospel. It's like, it's like we got to do this, and I thank this early group because it is that group that really set the stage for the support of community television and all that, which we'll get into.
Television a little different back in the 1980s from an equipment standpoint. What did it look like? What type of equipment did you have to look for and find to get to these studios and have staff and public use?
Yeah, and there was a lot of it, Dave. We had to buy a lot of equipment. It was the old analog equipment.
Right.
This is before the digital world. So we bought a lot of portable equipment, what we called Portapacks, which was a camera attached via wire to a separate recorder. A lot of it was VHS, and then a color camcorder. I think we had a lot of these Sony cameras. And then we outfitted these studios with some like basic switchers, audio boards, graphic generators, and all kinds of technology. And the cost of all that technology can easily be fit into this. I mean, this phone has much more technology than all the technology we had in those studios at the time.
So we talked a little bit about the commission end of things and the governmental part of this organization. How about the nonprofit? How did that come to be? How did we get CCX Media, as it's known today, or Northwest Community Television?
That's a great question, because this, and again, this is in terms of like milestones and things, it's like, it was the commission group that decided we need to form a nonprofit organization and put all the franchise fees into community television. So there's a 5% franchise fee, basically for the cable company to use the public rights of way, whether it's underground or on telephone poles. And so that money goes to the cable commission, and then in turn it goes to the nonprofit organization. And so instead of putting the money into snow plowing and who knows where within a city budget, the group decided early on we're going to dedicate all these funds for community television. When they made that commitment, it was that commitment that is, in terms of today, if they didn't make that commitment back then, I don't think you and I would be sitting here right now.
Which leads to maybe a question for viewers of, why aren't all community television systems the same? So I go across the river, or I go to other places in the metro or throughout the country, and I don't see this. That's a lot of that story, correct?
Right.
Is why this is different.
That's excellent, Dave. Yes. A lot of it has to do with how they negotiated franchise agreements, what level of funding they're giving to these agencies, because you could, in the early days, a lot of these things were run by the cable companies. We were run by the cable company for the first several years. But you can manage things to fail too, right? If you just underfund something, well, that's pretty much the nail in the coffin. This organization decided we're going to fund it and fund it right with the 5% franchise fee. And the fact that we had 9 cities, Dave, there's power in numbers, right? We're able to have a much better system. So that's why if you look around, even around the metro area or other areas, maybe they only have 1 city or a couple of cities, because of the strength of 9 communities, and some fairly large ones too. I mean, our population base out here is 350,000 total. Right. I mean, that would be the third after after Minneapolis, St. Paul. If you add up the population base of our 9 cities, we'd be like the next biggest area in the state.
And we'll talk about some of that service as we go throughout the building here in a little bit. But let's talk a little bit about some of the early milestones. Who were the people that first used the equipment? How did this then start to be shown to the community and be an asset to the communities?
Back in the early days, again, this is well before iPhones and
right.
Affordable video gear. we're kind of like the only game in town for video equipment and things, and getting a program on the channel. So I remember reaching out to a lot of different groups because there were channels dedicated for just about everything.
Right.
I mean, if you recall, we had an interfaith access channel, we had a labor access channel, we had youth access. I mean, it went on, education, city. I mean, it just went on, and arts access. Well, over time we figured out we couldn't program all those channels, because what you find over time is television's a lot harder to make than what it looks like, right? It's very time consuming. But that's how we reached out to a lot of those groups, the nonprofit groups, and there were a lot of shows in the early days. And I remember the very first one I worked on, the first show that came out of this entire system was Seniors on Screen,
right,
which is a group of senior citizens out of Golden Valley that decided to do a talk show with host Irene Novak. It was amazing. They did hundreds of shows. Those were like the good old days, as they say.
So the community got very involved in that way, coming in, producing their own programs or checking out equipment. Also, staff got involved, and staff at that point worked with volunteers very closely on sports and community events. Why was that so important? How did that turn out to be a good move for the organization to cover the sports and community events?
It was critical because at the time there was no sports coverage and things like that. And now, I mean, you look at our sports coverage today, it's just like, this is like equivalent to what you would see on like ESPN or some of the broadcast stations. It's a great way to feature these athletes in these schools, and to get more people involved in watching our content too. A lot of people like sports. If you're a parent of a kid in sports, you just love like the kinds of programming that we do here. So we've done, as you know, thousands of sporting events over the years, and that has just been a great kind of a mainstay of what we've been doing for many years.
Let's talk about city meetings for a minute. A big part of what community television does for the communities, and you personally have been involved in city government, being a council member, also in schools, being on a school board. So why was it important and a key element of the system to do meeting coverage and to show those meetings to the community?
Dave, I think the most important aspect of that is the whole idea of transparency of our public officials. I just look back too. I mean, we've been averaging about 430 meetings per year that we do, gavel to gavel coverage of meetings. And so that's about well over 17,000 meetings, public meetings, gavel to gavel, that we have done on this system. And Tim Gaffron is one of the staff that works with our cities, and it's important because and people watch them, because now we have all these numbers, and you go, wow, there may have only been like 10 people sitting in the council chambers, but then you go look at the numbers and go, oh, by the way, there were like 50 or 300 people watching it online. And so it's a great way for people to watch their city council members and the commissions doing their work. And there's often times where people would be watching on TV or online and go, oh, I want to get involved with that. They would run down to City Hall and take part in the conversation that's going on.
Few more minutes here. We're going to talk about some of the way back history as Mike retires after 40 years of community service here, and then we're going to take a little walk around the building and show some of the areas that we do things here at Northwest Community Television, CCX Media. Early challenges. Do any stick out in those early 10, 20, 30 years that you go, that was a challenge we overcame, and how did you go about that?
I think some of the challenges were, maybe there were some of the technical challenges of trying to keep the equipment. There was so much equipment and so many things that needed to be done in terms of repairs of equipment. But then again, as we were growing, it was like the challenge of making sure that you kind of like divvy up the money for specific purposes. So, back when we started in the very early days, we may have been more, simply public access focused. But over time, the cities were expecting more from us from a professional standpoint and getting things done, because we could not, actually tell a volunteer, you have to do this or you have to do that. They pretty much could do their own show. Right. So there was this time where we had to maybe reallocate some funds, and then there were times where we said, do we really need all these channels? So we overcame a lot of those things. So it's hard, once you give something, it's hard when you take it away, right?
Let's talk a little bit about the biggest changes. So technology, I would have to guess, is one of the biggest from day one to 30 years into your time here. And also from a financial standpoint, Tell me personally, for you, a change in your role was coming in and setting up studios and doing some of that contact, and then being, as we lovingly call, a bean counter, or helping
Right.
us out on a financial end. How did that change for you? What was the interest to get into that part of the operation?
Yeah, it was, you know, a lot of things. I am thankful for. We all learned a lot of things on the job, right? We kind of came out
Yep.
of a media world in college, or whatever, communications. And I owe a lot to this organization for giving me and employees opportunities to try things and do things. And so I learned a lot. I mean, I learned a lot when I started in Fridley. I'm just this young kid, and I'm all of a sudden in charge of this studio that had 1-inch tape machines, and it was actually a professionally built studio. I'm going, wow, is this like? And so you just kind of like try to be a quick study.
Right.
But yeah, doing the switch over. What was good on that is, like, at least I had a good understanding of all the TV things. So when the time came to count the beans and make policy and those types of things with the board of directors, I understood what the needs were. So.
And how about technology? How did it change from those early
my
days to
gosh.
even into the 90s, 2000s, that the technology just kept changing so fast that we almost couldn't keep up with it?
Right. It is, like anything. You get one of these one day, and then 6 months later, it's out of date. The biggest changes in technology, I think, when we went from analog to a digital world, where everything became digital and the quality got better, and then we went from like a tape, and we'll show you some formats later. We went from a recording on tape to recording on analog tape to digital tape, and then ultimately, and to hard drives and all that. But the whole digital world has changed everything, and the HD. I mean, when we had our last franchise renewal process like 10 years ago, one of the big things we were looking for is getting high definition. Right. We're recording this program in high definition. Where there was a period of time where we could record in high definition, but not telecast in high definition. Well, we were able to negotiate some HD channels back in the day, and it just makes a huge difference. Again, talk about managing things to fail. If you don't want to be flipping channels and going, well, this looks good. All of a sudden, this thing is like really fuzzy and bad. I mean, the signals that come out of here, the quality, it's phenomenal. It's on par with every other channel that's on there. So it's very, very exciting. And when we talk in another segment later, we talk about the whole digital revolution of all the things we're doing in the on the internet and social media and all that. So we'll get into that. But the whole thing from analog to digital, and then the cable system going from an analog system to a digital system was a huge, huge change.
Can you tell there's a little passion behind this man in this industry? Yeah, so he's like this every day. I can tell you that for sure. We're going to take a walk around the building now in the next couple of minutes to look at a couple of the different areas. Tell me, before we start walking, about this building and what this meant to this organization and to this system.
Dave, when I think about milestones, so one of the first ones was that the fact that the commission was so into supporting community TV. The second one was when the commission decided to take over all local programming from the cable company, because the cable company really didn't want to do it anymore. They really wanted to give it up. And I to this day, I say that if we were cable company employees, we wouldn't be doing this anymore. And it's nothing against. It's just that their goals were to get cable subscribers and things, and community TV just wasn't it.
They were in the business of business.
Exactly. So this was a huge, huge change and a milestone to have the cities basically run the whole thing, and then. And then part of that is the cable company they said, we need you guys to get out of the building, right? So one thing led to another. We ended up building a building right across the street where we're sitting in right now. We're in the third and final phase of you never know what final phase is. There's going to be a fourth phase. But the building was critical, because then we were able to, we got into consolidation phase where because it was hard doing all these websites, not websites, hub site studios where we operated in different areas. And then we couldn't have as good of equipment because you had to basically, with a budget, go, okay, now I got to get 5 cameras, but of lesser quality because I have to get it to 5 different locations versus a very good camera at one location. So that helped a lot by building this building and have one nice super center, so media center.
All right, the building we're talking about is at 6900 Winnetka Avenue North, and Mike, again, a key part in getting this building running and some of the updates. So we're going to take you through 3 different areas and talk about some of the things that have occurred over the years. Again, Mike Johnson joining us as he retires in 2022. Amazing career of community service. Stay with us as we head throughout the building. Now part 2 of our look back at an amazing career of community service. Mike Johnson retiring from CCX Media here in 2022. Mike, we're at the front of the building here at 6900 Winnetka. We talked a little bit earlier about how it came to be. Tell us a little bit about how, again, this was so important and what were some of the challenges and milestones in creating a building?
Yeah, well, there were challenges because back in the day, Dave, we were trying to figure out whether we should go into an existing building and do a rehab into it or actually build a building. And so there was lots of studies done back in the 80s of figuring out which route to go. Ultimately, it was decided to build a building because at the time there wasn't a lot of technology to do something further away. And it just so happens that there was an open space right across the street from the cable company. And so we built this building and literally interconnected the two together. So there was a lot of technical reasons too, so we could be close by and that the signal wouldn't be degraded in any way back then.
What was the year that the process started and when did the building first open to the public?
I'd say probably around 1984 time frame, and then in 1985 some final decisions, and then they went out for bids, and so construction actually began in 1985, and then we moved into the building in about June of 1986.
And you have your fingerprints all over this building as far as some of the remodeling and things that have been done. Again, how has that turned into a passion of yours and kind of being a building remodeler and building builder?
Well, I didn't do it all. I got Tamisha did some over on the Create side, which we'll be over to in a little bit. But you learn a lot about construction in this job too, because we've done 2 additions onto this building, and we did some rehab work in some of the hub site studios way back when. So it's a great way to learn about construction techniques and remodeling and what looks good, what may not look so good. And so we finally, a couple of years ago, we finally did a rehab of this area up here.
You took the mauve out, is that correct?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Everybody says, wow, this really looks like early 1980s.
Right.
And so we updated the look a little bit.
Let's talk a little bit about the use of the building then. So in the initial days, the first part of the building here, what happened inside and who else was inside besides who we know now to be inside?
Well, we basically, even back then, if you recall, we did the Twin Cities Regional Cable Channel back in the day, and it all started on this section of the building, and where you see the sign back here where it says Northwest Community Television Member Cities, that was actually a doorway into the control room.
Right.
And behind the big CCX Media thing here, there was a big storage closet for portable video, and then we had another doorway over here on this side. And so it was a studio that was used for both public access purposes and for professional staff usage. So we're always kind of going back, well, who gets this studio now?
Right.
Who gets this time? And so there was a lot going on back in those days, and it just all looks so much different now. And but now that we have these other sections too, it really turned out quite well.
We'll go into other parts of the building in just a second. Let's talk a little bit about technology and format. So you've got a show and tell for us here, and Mike has collected things. He never throws anything away, which is a good thing for us because we've got a lot. So let's walk down the list here.
Do not come into my office because there's a lot there.
So take us through the years. These are the videotapes or the recording apparatus for our system throughout the years. What have we got, Mike?
David, we really started out a lot on this 3/4 inch, like literally 3/4 inch tape format.
Yeah.
A lot of this tape was made by the 3M company because it's magnetic tape. And so most of the productions we did in the early days was on this 3/4 inch, especially on the professional side. And then on the volunteer side, we put a lot of content. Everybody knows this format, it's VHS. And it was like a 2-hour cassette. Go, wow, we can record 2 hours onto this cassette here. And then Panasonic and others came out with a new format called Super VHS, and it says Master Broadcast. So what this helped a little bit is there would always be problems with red colors in the early days with editing. We call it red bleed, where it would not look good. So Super VHS quality improved the the VHS quality as we know it today.
And so this big back in the late 80s and early 90s, correct, would be
Yeah.
the time frame. All right, and then we kept getting a little smaller.
Then we got in, so this switch, so we go from the analog world here to the digital world here. This is a DV cassette, standing for like digital video, and this is a 124-minute typical DV. Then we have something called DVC Pro, which the staff used when we were doing all of our news productions
Right.
and things. And this was yet even a higher quality from the DV, but it's still digital video versus analog video. So we're actually one of the first organizations in the country to switch to this format. They even featured us in a magazine.
And another big part of your passion too was the technology.
Right.
You always like to get into the ground level with some of the technical people and talk about technology
yeah.
and kind of being on the cutting edge, right?
Right. It was fun, and being able to do that. One of the shows where you buy a lot of technology is called the National Association of Broadcasters show.
You spent a few days in Las Vegas
Yeah,
at those shows,
and
right?
you were at some of them,
wearing
too.
out shoes.
You definitely do. You log a lot of miles. And then there was this little mini DV that a lot of we were using for the public to use, a super duper mini size DV. And then our news department, and even to this day, this is a digital format, but this is called P2. Basically, it's this card. And technically, there's 3 SD cards in here, serial digital cards. But this gets you that super high quality on here. And then we all know these little things, these little SD cards that we use to this very day. We use these tiny little SD cards. In fact, this segment's being recorded on one of these little cards. And then there's all solid state, like for instance, on my little iPhone here, there's storage on here. It's all like solid state chip recording on a phone. So things have changed. As an example, I was out, just happened to be near a fire this weekend, so I took some video and some still pictures and sent it to the news team, and they were able to use some of it for the program. So that's pretty much the main formats that we've used, but we have to keep up with the technology. If you don't keep up with it, it's like you snooze, you lose. But it's come a long way, and the quality is phenomenal.
Mike would always ask the toughest questions when he got into those technical discussions about what's next. Final note we want to make here in the front, again, moving across the street to this part of the building. How about computers? What was IT technology like, and how did we evolve?
Well, if we can slide over here a little bit, back in the day, we started out here in the building across the street with typewriters.
Yeah, exactly.
There were no computers back when I started 40 years ago. There were typewriters, and then we did buy our first computer in around 1984-85 time frame. We had one computer. Yeah. I know it well, and I bought it. It's called an IBM AT, and at the time I think it had a 10 megabyte hard drive. I go, wow, this is the coolest thing ever. And I think it was like $7,000. Had a 10 megabyte hard drive. I go, wow, this is the future. And so and these are little people back in the computer days will remember floppy disks. Oh, yeah. We used those a lot in the early days. Then they got into these smaller disks for putting data on, because once we got into the computer world, we were able to begin making databases for program logs and scheduling. So now this whole place is run on computers and IT. Yep. I mean, everything. I mean, all the video, the whole world is in a kind of the IT world of transferring video and sending all over the world if you need to.
All right, you can pick this guy's brain anytime with all this knowledge. We're going to head into one of the production spaces now and talk a little bit about some of the things that evolved over the years in that space in the studio. Let's head there. Now inside one of the main production spaces here at CCX Media, Mike Johnson again retiring, but a big part of all of this behind us and all of the logos that you see behind us as well. Tell us about this space. Its use has changed over the years. Take us back.
Yeah, I mean, it just started out as kind of like a blank studio. I remember it was carpeted at the time, and we actually had two parts. We actually had this gigantic dividing wall that you would see at some conference at a hotel, where the dividing rooms for various purposes. That didn't work out so well, because I think we did some tests and go, hey, can you hear me? And knock, yeah, I can hear you quite well. It's kind of hard to have a folding door in a studio, so eventually we removed it. But a lot of traditional public access type shows were done here, and a lot of interviews. I mean, thousands of people have been featured in one form or another in the space that we're in right now. And it's absolutely amazing. And what you're seeing now is more of but even this set, I think, is at least probably 10 years old in terms of our news set.
Right.
Because we went through, we had different news sets, at least 3 different news sets, or 2 prior to this one, that, as time went on, we got a little, crazier and added some new features and things, but a lot has changed. So, and now they've got all this technology to do, and it's been around for a long time, it's no secret, but to do these virtual sets.
You bet. Take us back over some of the logos. We see a few behind us here. There's even some that go further back.
Exactly. So some of the logos you'll see, like the 12 logo, because we were on channel 12 for many years and still are in some respects, and then we're on an HD channel, which is much higher in the channel numbers, and then NWCT, which stood for Northwest Community Television. And we had logos before that. I remember the very first logo, when our official legal name at the time was Northwest Suburbs Community Access Corporation.
Right.
There was even a logo contest where somebody won the contest, and they made like CAC out of like
coax
wire,
cable,
the
right?
coax cable, and so that won the contest, and that happened to be our logo for a while. We put it on hats, T-shirts, just about anything you could put a logo on. And then there was this Northwest Community Television logo, more in the shape of a TV. And now, a couple of years ago, we did this whole rebranding to CCX Media, which stands for Connected Community Experience. And because we're more than just television, right? I mean, it made sense to switch over to this whole media concept, because a lot of our content isn't even necessarily watched on traditional TV channels anymore. It's all done watching content on phones, tablets, computers, content that is shared. And so, we're a little bit of everything.
This space used now mostly for news productions. Tell us about news. And again, you mentioned a little earlier how news came to be and how news has been important to this organization.
Well, it was decided quite a number of years ago to start some type of news program, but we didn't really want to start it unless we had kind of the buy-in from the cities to say, if we start doing news here, what happens if we do a negative story about the city, right? I mean, news is news. And they determined early on that they were going to have a total hands-off approach. And I can, honestly say that for all these years, they have not, tried to censor anything or change anything. So, that's worked quite well. But we're filling a void that the local stations cannot. One of the early founders, people have heard me say this a million times, but Ray Stockman, who lived in Golden Valley, and KARE 11 happens to be located in Golden Valley, he says, you know what? We have a lot of stories to tell, and they're not being told. And so really, this was like the impetus to get a lot of program or news stories and stories to be told, because thousands upon thousands upon thousands of stories have been told. And now more, in the last, 10 years, we've been sharing them digitally. And I mean, it's just going off the charts, and it's absolutely amazing. And Dave, stories that would have never been told otherwise. That's the importance of community TV. I always say, if we don't do it, who will, right? If you don't have like a local newspaper anymore, or even a local community television station, who's going to report on these things?
We're going to talk in just a minute about creative services, something new to CCX Media, now CCX Studios. To do that, we're going to go to the last part of the building, the one that was added on back in the 90s. We'll be there in just a second. Here we are at the newest addition to the CCX Media building, but it's been a while, Mike. Take us back to when the additions were added on and why they were added on. Why was it necessary?
Well, that's a good point, Dave. And the reason why is that we did this major consolidation. If you recall, in our first segment, I talked about we had 5 studios in different locations throughout the northwest suburbs. And then we just decided, you know what, it's going to be better if we just do this major consolidation to the super center, like this massive community media center where we can all have one big place with the best equipment possible. We can be operational more hours. And so we added on twice to the original building that was built in 85, 86 time frame. We built on a set storage area just to put all, because when you have all these sets, if you put them all in the studio and keep them there, they pretty much take up all your studio space. Right. So we said at one point, we need some set storage and a place where people can work on sets or build sets. So that was built around 1997. And then in 1999, we moved into this area here, and this was basically the final, I think one of the last studios we closed was New Hope. And then so all the operations were then moved into here. So at that point, around '99 or so, we had everybody kind of operating within this area, and it's just proven to be a great facility. And again, people don't really have to drive too far to get here anyway, and no one has ever complained like, hey, I have to drive from here to here, but it just worked out great. It's just great to have this type of facility within the northwest suburbs.
And in this part of the building, the studios, as you saw earlier, and you'll see again, also podcast room, something new, editing space, also space to check out equipment. So a lot happening in this area. How about some of the key milestones and memories of this space and of public access, or now as we know it, create over the years?
I think there's just been a lot of great people that have walked through our doors here. I mean, just amazing. I think back even just as recently as like a Barry Zavan who had come in here, and he was popular in the KSTP days, but he came here and he's since passed away. But he used to do a show here and do some interviews and things, and just so many people who have walked through these doors. We have a lot of diversity down here. In fact, diversity, in terms of television, we have a more diverse people doing programs here than just about anywhere else, because when you look at the population of say Brooklyn Park and Brooklyn Center and the diverse population there, a lot of those folks are coming here. They're using this space to help communicate with their neighbors and friends. And I do it, I call it management by walking around, but I love coming.
Right.
One of my favorite things is to come down here and just talk to those folks.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the changes for the space as well. A new era and some of that strategic planning you mentioned earlier talks about earning some income, and CCX Studios has started, and the creative services area. So tell us a little bit more about that and why that was a passion of yours to kind of see this evolve and look to something new.
Well, when we went through this basic strategic planning process, we said we have to figure out a way beyond cable franchise fees. Is how do we be self-sustainable? And so then this whole idea of having a creative services department where we could provide professional video services to nonprofits or businesses. We've dealt with a lot of different companies here, and they're very happy with our work, and our studio has been rented out. And so it's those types of things that we need for the future in order to help us sustain ourselves financially by people being able to rent out the studio, or we go out on site and do things. I mean, one example is this Good Leadership Group, where we do a program where you're familiar with, and they do leadership training for executives. And so they hired us to either do shows here in the studio or out on location, and they love using our staff. And anybody out there that might be watching this on a whim that needs video services, definitely give us a call.
All right, and some of the key people behind the cameras here. If you could turn it around, Dustin's right there holding the camera, and Tamisha right there working with the audio. So again, great space down here. Mike, let's head back into the studio, because again, 2012, a neat time that things changed here for your life with what we do here, and also brought us up to where we are today. Let's head back in the studio. Thanks again for joining us for this amazing look at a career of community service. Mike Johnson, retiring executive director, joining us. We're back in the studio after the tour, Mike. Let's talk a little bit about the last 10 years. So 2012 to 2022, and in 2012, a big year for you because Greg Moore, longtime executive director, retires, and you move into that position. Tell us a little bit about that time, that decision, what that was like, and what it meant having Greg Moore leave.
Well, it was difficult. Well, first off, I want to say a special thank you to Greg. If Greg's watching here.
Yeah.
I owe a lot to Greg because he gave me a lot of latitude, because I was basically a general manager, assistant executive director, and I learned a lot on the job. And I did a lot of budgeting. I did a little bit of everything. And so going from that, because I really had my hands in the pot of everything at the time. So I thought, I was the assistant executive director. They could have looked out further and said, well, maybe Mike is the right guy at the right time for this position. But Greg did an amazing job. I mean, he had a lot of political savvy because he came more from like a government type background, and being able to get some things going in the early days, and key in getting our building built and making sure that the franchise fees were coming in and not being, divvied up elsewhere. But because again, we're very capital intensive, we need, in order to run the operation, again, to do it right, it takes money to do it. So I just owe a lot to him and his, early vision and all the things that he did with the organization.
So this meant a change to two roles for you: executive director of the commission, executive director or general manager of the nonprofit. Tell us about the difference. I don't think people understand there are two different entities that you're in charge of.
Well, yeah, the Cable Commission is a joint powers agency, which is and it's set up. It's through a Minnesota government law. You could look it up, Joint Powers Agency, which is an offshoot of the government. And so we are. Because of the joint powers aspect is the 9 cities, right? And so we are funded through these means. And so we have the ability as a cable commission to negotiate franchise agreements on behalf of those cities in order for the cable company, whoever it is, to lay wires underground. And there have been other companies that have wanted to come in, but nobody survived. It's like there were several attempts over several different years. Most recently it was CenturyLink that tried to come in, and they just had a hard time competing, or their CEO said, you know what? We can't sustain this. We can't compete, especially if they have to build out a system to all the 9 suburbs. It's very capital intensive to do that. And so, but the Cable Commission, without that Cable Commission and the strong funding for the nonprofit, I don't know where we would be, right? So it's very critical that they're in that role.
So that role with the commission more governmental, but the role with CCX Media, or back then Northwest Community Television, more of a general manager and running a television station. Right. What was that like, and what were the fun parts of running a television station?
And that is quite frankly, I do say that is the more fun part of the job.
Yeah.
And the job is about, 80% community TV nonprofit, the other 20% or so is the Cable Commission in terms of my time for specific things. So we handle subscriber complaints on the Cable Commission side, but on the community TV side, it is a fun side because we're doing, we have this amazing operation here, getting high quality television, communications out to the public. And so it's a fun business to be in. We have a great group of employees, Dave. I mean, you know this, being around here all these years. I mean, if it weren't for the employees and the quality employees that we have, we wouldn't have the kind of content that we have. We wouldn't have, all the technical means here, because there is an old adage, content is king. Without content, none of this matters, right? You can have the best equipment in the world. We have great people who, throughout our whole organization that can do just amazing things with video, photography, live sports, public meetings, editing, city videos, or doing news stories. It's absolutely amazing. And so that's the fun side when you're putting all these things on, and then now more than ever you're seeing the viewership that because of these technical means that we can talk about in a little bit. But I really enjoy. I mean, I enjoy both. But if you had to put me on the witness stand,
right,
which I feel like I'm on right now, it is definitely more fun to be working on the TV side of things.
So let's talk about some of the milestones then in the last 10 years, from 12 to 22. Technology changed quite a bit again, and how people got programming changed a little bit. Tell us about some of the things from a Northwest Community Television to CCX Media standpoint happened were milestones.
Yeah, I think a big change now is the entire concept is everything is going on demand, right? I mean, it's like, we used to do all this, we call it appointment view, where we'd sit down and watch, in the good old days, the 6 o'clock news or the 10 o'clock news, or sit down and appointment view all these shows. We're in a totally different world now. I mean, back when, it was around 2012 where we started putting a lot of our content on YouTube. So we have a YouTube channel that has thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of videos on it. And people can watch any of those clips, even back, 12 years ago if they want.
Sure.
Or 10 years ago, make that 10 years ago. And it's still there. It's still there. And it's just like, wow, this is amazing. So the content now is retrievable by not only just within the northwest suburbs, but anywhere in the world. And we have people watching our content just about anywhere. So if somebody, say, grew up in Robbinsdale and still wanted to keep track of things happening in the northwest suburbs, they can simply go on the website or get our email links. And I mean, there's so many of those things. I think a milestone is this whole digital revolution in things. There are challenges with all that too, obviously, from the cable company side, because people are disconnecting traditional cable service, but they're not disconnecting their internet, because you need the internet. That's why everybody's subscribing to these streaming services like Netflix, Amazon Prime, using these Roku boxes or Apple TV, or all the TVs now being made are smart TVs. You don't even need those boxes. But we decided early on, Dave, you're part of that revolution. And strong into it, because I know in the early days, not everybody was on board with this, but we had to make some important decisions. Like, we need to be in that space, right? We need to be where everybody else is. We need to be where, if people are watching things on demand, we need to be providing content on demand. And so, you and the other staff here have done a phenomenal job of getting that content out there for people to see. And if it weren't for like the internet and all this, I mean, internet's a blessing and a curse. We all know the upside and downside, but the fact that you can record something and then, get it sent to somebody immediately versus the old days where we'd put things on videotape and send somebody a copy, those days are over. Now it's like, oh, you want the story we just did? Oh, we'll send it to you in 3 minutes, and then you can see it and share it. And it's that sharing capability that's amazing.
Did you ever think you'd have to study websites and become proficient at running websites, or also social media, and understand what Facebook was and how it worked?
It's an important part of what we do here. Yep. We need to be on social media. We need to get our content delivered. And you set up something in the early days with setting up through email marketing, setting up clips of programs and basically sending out here are the news stories you may have missed, but you put them in content in buckets. So if you live in the city of Maple Grove, all the Maple Grove stories would be there, and it would be sent to people who are interested in subscribing to the email links. And we're doing this now through Constant Contact. And so they get this email link and it says, oh, look at all the stories. And they can pick and choose what they want versus, just hoping that somebody watches at a scheduled time on a channel. I mean, those days, I'm not saying that the channel is not important. It's still important for certain reasons, but people want their content when they want to watch it on, the whole on-demand thing is important.
How about the passion for you for local content? So obviously, as the name changed to Connected Community Experience, or CCX Media, that was showing through again, that you thought the connection to the community was important. Why, as you look back over your career, do you think that connection is so important to you, and you've tried to push that and foster that in the community, to be connected?
You have to be, because when you look at the channels now, just look at the 24-hour news channels. It's kind of like the same stuff going over and over and over again in a lot of these national channels. Where else can you get high quality, and even the local broadcast channels like KARE 11 and WCCO and KMSP 9, none of them can do the kinds of things that we do. And that's why we have to always focus on, hyper-focus on our communities. Because if we don't focus on our communities and start going elsewhere, then people go, well, I can get this somewhere else. So the fact that we're doing this local thing and featuring, so we talked earlier about sports. When you think about it, Dave, at one point we made a decision, yes, we honor the athletes and we do, and the whole sports thing is a great thing. But eventually we said, we also need to look at honoring students with standout students. You look. So when you think of all the bad things going on in the world, when you see these stand-up, and athletes too, it's like, wow, these kids, and you see them talking. Sometimes our athletes talking on a microphone, like to John and Jay, they seem, really well-spoken. It's just like, wait, now they're prepared for the big time.
Right.
But these students, you see them in our standout student segment and any other news stories we do about the kids in our schools, it's like, I just feel there's hope for the future when you see some of these kids, and it's like amazing. And so we have featured thousands of kids, across the board, but the localism is so important. We talked earlier about the importance of public meetings and transparency. sports, education, those are big ones, but working with nonprofits. I know you work a lot with our nonprofit groups too, and beyond our cities, and that's important to help them get the word out. So, I think we do a great public service in keeping it hyper-local, because otherwise, where is the localism? We're concerned about the future, and what's something called the news desert, which you're familiar with,
Sure.
where
Sure.
the local newspapers are struggling, right? So where are people going to get news, and will there be gatekeepers of this content? I worry about media literacy and people seeing things. We've heard the term fake news and all that, but do they really discern, is this true or is it not true? When you look about the things on the internet, Twitter, Facebook, and there's a term out there that says, a lie can make it halfway around the world before the truth gets its shoes on. You want to make sure for the future that our young people know how to discern the best they can, right? Whether something is true or not, because everybody has these things now, and you could be your own reporter and you say, hey,
right.
Dave Kaiser just committed a crime. Well, how do we know that, right? Was there a gatekeeper? Was there an editor double checking? That type of thing.
Let's talk a little bit about your great giving back, not only to our community, but to the state and to the nation. I don't think people know that as much, of your involvement in state organizations and also national organizations. What was the passion there, and what were some of the fond memories of being involved in organizations outside of the Northwest suburbs?
Well, I think it's a great way to share, knowledge, and I'm happy now you're on one of the state organizations, which is MACTA, and hopefully someday NATOA too. But there are state groups that work with, they're more like cable-related telecom issues, where information is shared, because I think collectively we can learn a lot from each other. And again, back to the strength in numbers, right? If we can get enough people interested, if there's legislative issues at the state level, or if they're at the national level, then there's a group called NATOA, which is a group of executive directors from all over the country that focus on national telecom issues, and just making sure that as all these billionaires are buying up, all these properties, and then when you have the big tech industry really consolidated just to a couple of groups, it gets scary, really, when you think about it. And so I think, NATOA is there saying, we need to continue to have localism. We still need to be able to protect our public rights of way. And so I had an opportunity to speak at the FCC. I've had an opportunity to partake in a lot of different things, spoke at a lot of conferences, and a great way to meet people. And so I've developed a lot of friendships from those organizations that are important, these associations.
Right. Well, we're grateful for your time and effort in those areas. Let's look a little bit at the future then. So how about the future of Mike Johnson? What's next for Mike Johnson, and how does it feel to be retiring after 40 years?
And I see we're down to the last 5 minutes, so I better keep it short because it could be a long story.
Right.
Well, well, first and foremost, it's going to be hard to leave here. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's like, being kind of like the first guy that walked through the door, and now leaving 40 years later is not going to be easy. But so if you see a few tears rolling down my face, because believe it or not, I may not look like an emotional guy, but I am. I cry at movies, depending on the scene. But I'm really committed to a lot of volunteer work.
Yeah.
I've had some opportunities through church, like we went to Haiti and we helped on a water delivery team. I've volunteered on various boards over the years. I want to spend a lot of time. One thing that is really near and dear to my heart is I'd love to be, again, back to the whole volunteerism thing. I want to take time and I want to help kids read, right? Like be a volunteer reader at one of the school districts,
Sure.
right? Because that's a critical thing. I mean, I owe a lot to where I am now is just like basic reading, and there's a lot of kids that need help, and so I want to volunteer some of my time there. It's no secret I'm a volunteer for this Honor Flight organization where I've been involved with that since 2010, and I love doing that. I go to Washington, D.C. a lot.
Tell us a little more about that. What does that mean?
Well, that is a group that flies veterans from World War II era, from the Korean War era, and the Vietnam War era. They fly them to Washington, D.C. for free. It's all done typically in one day, unless they're coming from the West Coast and they need to stay in a hotel. But these trips, through private fundraising, these things average anywhere between $80,000 and $100,000 to rent a plane, to get coach buses, to do all this. And we're going to celebrate. I'm going to be in Washington, D.C. Well, I'll be there actually in 2 days from now, but there's an event in May where we're celebrating our 250,000th veteran.
Wow.
That would have been brought to Washington, D.C. to see the memorials.
That's
like
amazing.
the World War II Memorial, the Korean Memorial. We go to Arlington National Cemetery. And I'm a tour guide on a bus. I do other things too. Sometimes I'll be a guardian and do one-on-one veteran things, but I love doing the tour guide thing. It's me with a microphone,
yes.
watch out.
I can imagine. It'd
and
be fantastic.
So you get to tell stories, but you get to honor these people. It's very, very patriotic. A lot of tears flowing from some of the vets.
Oh, I'm sure.
And just an amazing time. So, but other than that, I need to work on my own self in terms of, I joked about just getting exercise and having some free time, and then traveling and trying to do more things and visiting family and friends, and just maybe slowing down a little bit. It's going to be hard because I like,
Right.
like you're like the Energizer Bunny around here, Dave. It's like constant motion. And so, it is going, I don't think I will always have a hard time relaxing. I'm just that kind of guy. I'm a little hyper good, not hyper bad, hopefully. But
well, you'll be involved, I'm sure, and I'm sure there's probably school districts that are jotting this down right now going, Mike Johnson reading to kids, this would be great. Can I be the first on the list to call him?
I would love to help kids out. And hey, who knows? We were joking before the show started that maybe I could be seniors on screen host.
There you go, right?
We
bring the
it
show
back.
Let's end with community media. What's the future hold? What is your thought as you look forward to community media after you retire? What do you hope happens?
Well, I'm gonna say, I know you're hosting the show today, but this is the guy who's going to be replacing me, Dave Kaiser. I'm very proud that you're going to take this position. But I think the future is good if everything is done properly, right? I mean, I think it's all about content too. If we do our content right and get it out and be a service to our cities, the cities want service from us. So first and foremost, and thankfully we've been very, the cities have supported this organization for the last 40 years, never threatened to pull out of the franchise or anything like that, because they feel like they're being served in some way, that we make a difference in the community, through all the things that you do, our sports team, our city crews, and the whole works. The create department that allows people to come in here and make shows. That is important. Now, granted, people can make things with their phone here, but there's things that never get produced if you still need to have somebody to say there really ought to be a show about this and we really need to do that. And so I think there will be maybe some funding issues, but I know that we went through the strategic planning method a couple of years ago, and there are ways. There's no doubt in my mind. I think the community TV, the future is bright. I really do, because without this, you are going to have a desert. It's just like, again, the big players at the top. It's like, I think, there's been talk about, how do we fund like local news operations and things like that even from the government level. Now there gets to be a little iffy. It's like, well, you want the government funding those things, but right now in terms of what we're doing, I mean, we're running a local news operation and do get funding, but the cities basically keep their hands off of that, and so again, I do think the future is bright. So I'm not retiring because I knew I wanted to after 40 years, and I'm 62. I said I kind of want to go and do some other things and do all my volunteer work.
Yep.
And again, I'm very appreciative of all our boards and our commission members, but a special thank you to all our staff. Amazing people that have worked here over the years, hundreds of them, many who have gone on to big things, and some of them come back and say, hey, the grass isn't always greener. I kind of like working here. So, and Dave, I want to, I know this is the last part of our segment here, but, wish you well in taking, I think you're going to do a fantastic job. I've been telling all the colleagues that he's a rock star and he's going to do a great job. So Dave will hand over the keys. We'll have a little celebration.
There we go. Huge shoes to try to fill. Mike, congratulations. Thank you so much for taking the time here and the commitment to the area. Again, truly a career of community service. Mike, thanks so much. Thanks for joining us here, and keep watching CCX Media. Mike will be watching, I'm sure. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Dave.